Good afternoon. We'll go ahead and call the November 17th, 2022 Board of Zoning Appeals meeting to order. I would like to request that from staff that confirmation of the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been properly provided.
I can confirm that the packet was posted and the required notice of the meeting was provided.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to roll call.
Met our Kansas Open Meeting Act obligations, and to proceed we need to have a quorum, so I'm going to call roll. Board Member May. Here. Board Member Owens. Here. Board Member Waters. Board Member Troe.
Here.
Board Member Hardy.
Here.
Chair Borzlab.
Here.
So we have 5 members present. That constitutes a quorum of the board, and we have declared this an open public meeting, so you can move forward with your today's business.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to the approval of minutes. Are there any additions or corrections from the September 15th, 2022 regular meeting minutes? If there's no additions or corrections to the minutes, is there a motion for approval?
I'll make a motion to approve. Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the September 15th, 2022 minutes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, we'll move on to new business, which is application V22-10, which is filed by Nextech Wireless.
So, Mr. Chair, we have a sign area variance that has been requested by Nextech Wireless, and that is to go from the current 508 square feet of sign area that's present on the property to 854 square feet. And that variance request is to allow placement of 3 new pole-mounted signs on a new sign pole. And so those 3 115 square foot signs combined equal 346 square feet of proposed new sign area. And the sign is requested and proposed at a commercial strip center on Marketplace on the east side of South 9th Street. It's currently occupied by Hog Wild Barbecue, Nextech Wireless, and the Eye Doctors. And the address is 2525 Marketplace. Mr. Hers is going to have the staff report for you, and Creighton Remus is joining us via Zoom representing Nextech Wireless.
Thank you, Dean and Commission. The subject property is the Marketplace Center, which, as Mr. Andrew mentioned, currently has 3 tenants: Hog Wild Barbecue, Nextech Wireless, and the Eye Doctors. To the north, you have Hong Kong Buffet, and to the south, you have Aaron's. And on the west side of the road, you have the Mid-State Plaza area with Ashley Furniture and Slotsky's as the outlots nearest to this particular property. So currently, the property has a number of signs. There is an existing ground sign, as well as a pole sign for Hog Wild and a reader board sign. Eye Doctors has a wall sign, Nextech Wireless has a wall sign, and Hog Wild has 2 wall signs with the Hog Wild and their logo, and then the Pit Barbecue wall sign also. And so if we were to go and just see the property, this is what it looks like, and driving down Marketplace. So, went too far. So this is the multi-tenant property. There's the existing ground sign, as well as the existing wall signs and the Hog Wild pole sign. And so, as Mr. Andrew mentioned in the prelude, the property itself is part of the commercial zoning district, the C5 zoning district, which allows for 4 square feet per lineal foot of building frontage. The property itself has 127 feet of frontage facing Marketplace and 9th Street. And what that means is the total amount of allowable sign area for the property is 508 square feet. Currently, we have a breakdown of all of the existing signage here on, let's see what page that is in your report. I think it is, looks like page 4, and I also have it on the screen. But when you add them all together, you come up with 507 total square feet of sign area currently, which means that there is 1 additional square footage of sign space available. And what the applicant is proposing to do is erect a pole sign that would have 3 sign faces. So we would actually call it 3 pole signs because they're separated by more than 2 feet. It's a triangular shaped pole sign where you'd have 3 pole structures and sign faces that are connected to each of the pole structures. So this would be the elevation drawing. So you have three sign faces that have Nextech wireless. Each one of them is 115 square feet, 115.5 square feet, and the total sign structure is 50 feet tall. Now, the purpose of this sign is a dual function, where Nextech Wireless, being that they're a wireless telecommunications company with mobile cell service, they're looking to add a cell tower within the poles. So the sign structure itself, the sign poles would function as antenna towers for their wireless network, as well as their proposed signage for the property. The applicant, when we look at uniqueness, they have stated that the property is something they acquired in 2022, and when they acquired the property, they inherited the existing sign area, and so that additional square footage that's allowed is something that they inherited and doesn't allow for them to add any additional visibility for their business. And so staff would respond by saying that we understand that. It's a multi-tenant site, and it has C5 zoning, which is similar to all of the surrounding properties. If we were to look at a zoning map, what you would notice is that most of the properties in the C5 or in the South 9th Street corridor in this area are either C5 or C3, with the east side primarily being C5 and the west side primarily being C3. But a lot of the uses are similar, where you're seeing restaurants, you're seeing retail, you're seeing service-oriented type of business operations. And so the operations of Nextech Wireless and the property itself is something that staff does not appear to be unique in relationship to similar situated properties in the South 9th corridor. As to the dual functionality of the pole sign supports, staff would note that it's really an independent related issue, because they could erect a cell tower that is independent of any signage through a separate permit. And so whether or not the sign that's being proposed is approved as a variance by this board is related to whether or not they could erect a cell tower, because they could do that through a separate permit and separate instrument. Looking at the adverse effects on the neighbors, the applicant states that the sign would be fully contained on their property and wouldn't block the visibility of any of the surrounding neighbors. Staff agrees that that would be the case in this case. The concern, however, is that the adversity that would be impacting the neighbors is that they would be allowed to have additional sign area per lineal footage that the other neighboring properties wouldn't be, and so that would be the adverse effect that staff could potentially see. Looking at the unnecessary hardship, the applicant states that the majority of the signage is being used by the other tenants, and if you look at how the breakdown of signage is conducted on the site, the majority of it is being used by Hog Wild, with the minority being used by the eye doctors and Nextech Wireless. And staff would acknowledge that that is true. However, we would point out that when we are administering the sign code, we aren't administering, particularly in a multi-tenant situation, we are not administering which tenants get what amount of sign area. What we're doing is we're looking at the total sign area that's allowed for the multi-tenant building, and we rely on the property owner to allocate how much signage each of the tenants get proportioned. Staff would also note that when we drive by, we don't feel that there's any visibility issues with the existing sign area. So even though Next Tech Wireless does have less signage than Hog Wild, we do see that there is an existing ground monument sign that appears to be very visible as you're driving by, either on South 9th or Market Street. And there's also an existing wall sign that is clearly visible from the street as well. Looking at the effect of public health and the safety and welfare of the community, Nixik Wireless states that they will follow all of the rules and ensure that they don't have any adverse effects on the public. And staff would agree that the impact that the sign would have would be fairly minimal because it won't impact visibility, it won't impact traffic, it won't have a lot of negative effects that are related to safety or morale items or elements. However, it could have a negative impact on the general public by setting a precedent for properties that feel like they need additional sign area than what the code allows, and not having a good way of creating findings to differentiate how this property is unique, maybe setting a unnecessary or a negative precedent for future cases. In looking at the conformity with the general spirit and intent of the ordinance, the applicant states that the sign will not increase or add clutter or obtrude upon any of the neighboring properties. And staff would note that the purpose of the sign regulations is a multifaceted. One certainly is the visible impact that signs can have on our community and making sure that we aren't posing any hazards to the life safety of motoring public and reducing or obstructing sight lines. We also want to make sure that we have an aesthetically pleasing streetscape and we aren't increasing unnecessary clutter. It's not uncommon for businesses to want to have additional sign area because it's something that they feel they could use to increase their visibility within the community and bring in more customers. However, our sign code is set up, and part of the purpose is to allow people to have adequate amount of sign area while still having a level playing field where all of the businesses are allowed to have the same amount of sign area. And the concern that we would have as staff is that by allowing extra sign area without good justification could set a precedent that might undermine the ordinance as well as the general spirit and intent of what it is meant to uphold. So with that, we do have a number of findings on page 9 that kind of summarize what we went through in our report. Your alternatives would be: 1, you could approve the maximum sign area variance as requested with or without any conditions that you feel are necessary. You could postpone consideration if you feel additional information is needed, or you could deny the applicant's request if the required findings of fact cannot be made. And so if you were to look at our suggested findings on page 9, you would note that staff doesn't feel that the applicant has sufficiently described how their property is unique and that additional sign area above and beyond what other property owners in Salina that are similar situated is allowed to have has been made. And so we would recommend that the application for additional sign area be denied. So option 3 is what staff would recommend, and we would ask for the applicant to describe how this property is unique or elaborate on how the denial of the requested sign would create an unnecessary hardship on their property and their business. So with that, staff would take any questions that the board might have, and we can look at any of the slides or graphics that we already viewed.
Are there any questions for staff?
Thank you. Are you aware of the limitations in surrounding communities of the amount of square footage per linear foot of property?
In terms of how does this compare to other
Correct.
communities? Periodically, we've done benchmarking. I can't tell you off the top of my head that I can give you solid examples of what those currently look like. I will say that from my experience, and we do work with sign contractors from around the region in the central part of Kansas, that when they're dealing with our sign code, they are impressed by how liberal it is, meaning how much sign area is allowed per footage, per lineal foot of building frontage, as well as we don't have a limit on the number of signs. A lot of sign codes have a cap on the number of signs. We don't. It's all based on building frontage. And in this case, part of the issue may be possibly that hog wild, if you were to put the allowable sign area that's out there into a pie chart, you would see that they have a larger portion of the sign area when compared to the eye doctors and Next Tech Wireless. But I think part of that is that the original developer of the property was the owner of Hog Wild when it was developed, and so they gave themselves that sign area. And this property has been in operation and use since 2010, so we're talking over a decade, and we haven't had any issues or complaints of people having a hard time seeing or understanding what businesses are operating there and being able to find those businesses.
I think what distinguishes our sign code from most sign codes that other sign contractors are used to dealing with is the fact that we don't limit the number of signs. So they're usually very surprised that, and Midstate Plaza has done a good job, but at one time, Midstate Plaza, before they had the current ownership, they had 9 different pole signs out on 9th Street in Magnolia. They merged those into a large pylon sign, which I think everybody appreciated, but we had a difficult time explaining that they have a massive amount of frontage, they have a massive amount of sign area available, and we don't limit the number of freestanding pole or ground signs that a center can have. In most communities, they limit the number of pole or ground signs numerically, and we do not. So that's what makes our sign code more liberal than a lot of communities, is that we have the formula for frontage, but then we also do not have any limitation. However, one point I was going to make is that a lot of the sites along South 9th Street are in what's called a planned commercial district. And in a planned commercial district, the signage is reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission and City Commission. In most of those cases, they have limited the number of freestanding signs to 1. And the other thing they have done is limit the height of the signs along 9th Street to 35 feet, so there's a uniform height along there, and you don't have businesses trying to out-height each other. And so it wasn't really mentioned in our report, but one thing that's somewhat unusual about this request, in addition to the size, is that the pole structure is 50 feet tall, and there are almost none of the signs along the South 9th corridor are 50 feet tall. They've almost all been limited to 35 feet in height by the Planning Commission and City Commission. This is not a planned district, so they have open C5 zoning.
Are there any additional questions for staff?
Planning, has the parking calculations been evaluated? It seems like we're taking up some stalls.
We did calculate the parking, and they had just enough surplus to accommodate the sign. So that wasn't part of the variance request because it's something that would be permitted under the code. It was the height and size of the sign structure itself that caused us to come before the board, but that's a good question.
Any additional questions? If there are no additional questions at this time, would the applicant like to speak?
No, I'm good right now. Thank you.
Does the board have any questions for the applicant?
Yes, I do, yeah. I can't tell. Yeah, I'm on, okay. I guess I come out of a generation where I remember all the signs back before a lot of these, and where you basically would look around the signs to see what the business was. I guess help me understand here how, in your mind, that would not be a problem here.
As far as looking around the sign to see the business, is that what you're?
Yeah. It's just there's so much of a sign up here that you can't really see the business, even though it's listed on the pole.
Yeah, I mean, it would block a little bit of the business, but you know, this sign, it's a dual purpose sign also. So what we're looking at doing is building this sign for our business advertising, but yet behind once the sign's up, we could put antennas behind them signs for actual cell phone coverage. That way we wouldn't have to build a tower that just stands out there. I mean, it's more of a dual purpose, and it would block a little bit of the business front, but all in all, it'd be a bigger asset to have that cell tower there. That it's kind of a stealth tower too, so the antennas would be behind that sign.
Okay. I guess I can't think of a better way of putting it, so go ahead.
Are there any additional questions?
So when you acquired the property, were you cognizant of the signage restriction on that property at that time?
No, it wasn't until we went to do this that we noticed that the signage restriction and that it was all used up.
I do have a question for you. Have you talked to other tenants in the building to see if they would be willing to give up some of their signage?
No, we haven't at this point, no.
Do you know if the amount of lease payment for that property is calculated at least somewhat on the amount of signage space that's available for it?
No, it is not. Yeah, so the lease payment's just on the square footage of the part they're using.
Does the board have any other questions for the applicant or for staff? If not, is there a motion from the board?
Before we get there, I do want to confirm that we don't have anyone from the public online to speak. I noticed there's a Nathan Sutter. I don't know if he's affiliated with Nextech Wireless or if he's an interested citizen, but I want to give them a chance to speak if they would like to.
Yep, I'm affiliated with Nextech Wireless. Thank you.
Thank you, Dustin.
That's all we have online and in the room, so.
Is there anyone on the board that would like to make a motion?
I'd move that we deny the applicant's request.
Is there a second from the board?
A second.
It's been moved and seconded that we deny the applicant's request, V22-10. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Are there any administrative items to come before the board?
We do not have any administrative items for the board to consider this evening. No business that would be considered administrative in nature.
Is there any, we'll now open it up to public forum. Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak to the board?
We do not have anyone on Zoom, and it doesn't appear we have anyone in the room either.
I would just mention two things under other business before we would consider adjournment, and that is, first, we have 3 applications filed and would be advertised for your December 15th meeting. So we will meet on the 15th of December. One of those is a residential rear yard setback. 2 of those are variances related to the project to redevelop the Lee buildings on North Santa Fe into loft apartments. And so there's 2 applications related to that. That will be on your December 15th agenda. I also wanted to share with the board that you, at a previous meeting, voted to deny a sign variance request related to the Subway restaurant on South 9th Street. And since that time, we have issued sign permits for replacement signage out there that rebranded the store but conformed with the size limitations were in effect. So they were in fact able to update and rebrand their signs. They just conformed with the limits that had been established and traded out those signs. So if you drive by, you'll see the yellow awnings or canopies gone and the new signage up sometime shortly. But they did reapply and reduce the size to conform with the size limits in place. So we wanted to give you that update. So
Thank you.
it was not the case that they could not rebrand the store, and so they won't be closing.
Thank you.
That's all we have for you this evening.
Is there a motion for adjournment?
Mr. Chair, I move that we adjourn.
Is there a second? Second. It's been moved and second that we adjourn the meeting. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Meeting adjourned.